Very pleased to welcome to the stage for a short conversation, but I think very relevant, timely, Assemblymember Rob Bonta. Let's have him come on up to the stage with a round of applause. Thank you, sir, for being here. I appreciate it. Your call. You want to sit or stand? Okay. Assemblymember, thank you. I'm reminded by a friend of mine who has worked in politics for a host of years. He's a Republican. He says, you know, forget what they tell you. The enemy is not the Democratic Party. He was in the Assembly. The enemy is the Senate. And that the tension is between the two chambers rather than the two parties. How much of that is true in your estimation? And I'm teeing this up to talk about universal coverage and a single-payer conversation, but you know, generally speaking, I think the two chambers have worked well together on healthcare. Is there a little bit of tension right now between the Assembly and the Senate?
First of all, let me say good afternoon. How are you guys today? Good to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. Rob Bonta in the State Assembly. I represent Oakland, Alameda, San Leandro. I'm the chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus, serve on the Health Committee, been there since I started in the legislature 6 years ago, was the chair and assistant majority leader now. So to the question, DJ, about the tension between the houses, there definitely has been an inter-house tension over the years. I think it's something that we inherited when we got here, something frankly that's baffled me. I felt like we're a legislature, although we are two houses, we're one branch of government, we should be working together more closely. I think with the new pro tem, who was our speaker for many of us in the Assembly, and we served with her. She was a colleague, she knows the Assembly, she has great relationships, and she's declared that there's going to be a new day with respect to the two houses working better together. And I believe her, I think she has a plan for that, and I think it's going to change for the better. When we're joined forces, we're more powerful and more effective.
Yeah, I think thank you first for your friendship to state reform, and to me, I appreciate it. I think your role, while it has changed over the years in the Assembly regarding health policy, I think that you're well regarded as a thoughtful policymaker by anybody who follows the stuff, whether they agree with you or not. So what are your thoughts then on this policy challenge related to universal coverage? And let me preface that by saying, I think it seems like there's a legitimate sort of reaction to the federal administration, and that this sort of fits within that context. There's a clear yearning for a more progressive, more accountable healthcare system by the population of California and others. But it's a big lift within the context of, particularly of state budgets and this gubernatorial administration, but it makes for great politics. Where do you see, at least on the Democratic left, where do you see sort of the divide between policy and politics? Are they very much aligned? Is this really about the gubernatorial election in 2018, or maybe the future, just the state of Democratic politics? Or is this something where it's time to marshal resources on the policy front, politics be damned? What are your thoughts there?
A couple thoughts. One, I think that the appetite for transformational, wide-sweeping change is high. People want to swing for the fence. They don't want to simply hit base hits and want to make big change. And that's sort of the political side. On the policy side, when you try to make big changes in a short period of time, there's often challenges. But I've never seen any policy that hasn't been impacted to some degree by politics. So the groundswell in California, I believe, and certainly in the Democratic Party, is to move towards universal coverage, single payer, is sort of the rallying, political rallying cry. And certainly that has huge challenges, as we saw with SB 562, the single payer bill that I was a co-author of. It required some additional revenues, which means taxes, which means 2/3 votes. It required some waivers from the federal government, a federal government that's not really in the mood to be giving any waivers to the state of California. It required going to the voters for some constitutional relief with respect to the GAN limit and Prop 98. So a policy that requires those things is a big piece of policy with some high hurdles.
Yeah.
It's not impossible, but it's difficult. But I think there was a sort of a push from the ground up to really swing for the fence and do something big. And I think that's what legislators are hearing all across the state, that folks want us to get to universal coverage ASAP.
Yeah, you were a leader pushing this in the Assembly, for sure. And I think that's a very fair statement. Maybe you can elaborate on it, that this is really more of a grassroots, that this enthusiasm came from the grassroots community, and the legislature sort of got in front of that parade, but this was not a creation of the legislature's making, right? This came from the grassroots community. At least some parts of it.
I think the nudge, sort of the tipping point, did come from grassroots push. But there's a lot of folks, including myself, who've long believed that single-payer systems can be the path to universal health care, to high-quality health care, to greater access. And so it was kind of an intersection of both, a groundswell with pre-existing support that brought in a broader coalition because of the groundswell. Mm-hmm. And it's very much the groundswell is values-based. It's based on what people believe is the right thing to do, the humane thing to do, the compassionate thing to do, not always sort of infused with all of the policy nuances and challenges that achieving and realizing that vision occurs.
Yeah.
So that's when the difficult conversations occur. When we say this requires taxes, that means 2/3. When we say this means a waiver, that means Mr. Trump has to and his administration have to give it to us for this to work. This means we've got to go to the voters. Some folks that's hard to hear because it means obstacles and maybe slowing down the process, and maybe the process not happening today, or the outcome not happening today. So that's where leadership comes in, and we need to have those hard conversations, because if we're going to get there, we need to get there the right way with the right components and foundations, and it has to work, because if we do a single payer system and it fails right away, then what's the point? What
are your observations that you'd care to share, if any, on the Attorney General's role? He's got a prominent lawsuit against Sutter. He's featuring the issue of cost. Do you think that, I'm just wondering sort of philosophically, and people have a range of opinions on this, including all of the above, that because healthcare is just such a complex topic, that maybe we do need greater activism from the executive branch, or maybe the last thing we need is to have judges writing case law that influences or impacts the complexity of the healthcare system. What are as a legislator, as a policymaker, I know this is, separation of powers and all that, but I'm wondering what your view is about the sort of activism of the Attorney General's office and the appropriateness of that role.
I am supportive of an Attorney General's office that actively enforces the laws that the legislature has put in place. Our job is to make the laws. The executive branch, executes and enforces those laws. That the Attorney General can certainly enforce those laws on the books. If there's no enforcement, then what's the point of them being there? And so. Sometimes a point needs to be made that these laws are here and they need to be followed, and consumers need to be protected, and you can't have anti-competitive behavior, whatever it may be, that the Attorney General is addressing. And I think that's right to make that point, and every once in a while send a reminder that these laws are there to be followed and to be complied with 100%. And so that in partnership is important. If there's an Attorney General or office that sort of lays down, so to speak, and sits down and doesn't enforce these laws, then it undermines the legislature. So I think it's a good partnership when a legislature with intent and vision for what the healthcare system and ecosystem should look like puts laws into place, and then an Attorney General enforces those. That's a good partnership.
There's been a lot of discussion here today about rate regulation and assembly legislation in the legislature. On this topic, do you have any sort of initial observations about potential rate regulation legislation, and whether it's appropriate, inappropriate, any obstacles or benefits that you see at this sort of relatively early stage?
I definitely, two things. One, the conversation that we're having about the unsustainable rising cost in healthcare, double-digit increases year after year, is the right and hard conversation that we need to have. So we're having it. It's not easy. I think most everybody sort of in the legislature, perhaps in this room, agree on that problem being perhaps the key problem in healthcare today in California and in the United States, and that it animates and underpins every discussion that we have about healthcare. How do we contain costs while trying to achieve our vision of true access to high-quality healthcare, affordable healthcare for everyone? And so, there's a bill that seeks to provide a solution on that Mr. Kalra has introduced regarding a commission that would have some price-setting authority on the commercial payer side. And are there obstacles? Tons of obstacles. There's huge opposition to the proposal, and I and other of my colleagues that were in Health Committee during the presentation and testimony and debate on that bill expressed huge concerns and reservations, but we also expressed support to address this issue of the unsustainable high cost of healthcare and the need to address it, and the need to address it in a way that is collaborative with all stakeholders who are impacted, meaning everyone in this room, everyone who works in the healthcare system, to put their best ideas on the table to try to address it. Maybe the solution will be something else. But how we get to that solution is really important, and I think working together we can identify some important resolutions to that challenge. So I don't know that this is the answer. I do know that I supported the bill in the first committee so that the conversation could continue. The majority of my colleagues did as well. We have to address this issue. Doing nothing is not an option, and I hope that we can come together in a collaborative way to continue that conversation and find some real solutions.
Let me ask you, you're as Assistant Majority Leader and on the Assembly Committee of Health, what are you spending and maybe it's not healthcare, but probably isn't healthcare, but what are you spending your mental energy on when it comes to, what is your attention? Because attention is sometimes the most finite resource. What are you spending or allocating your attention towards when it comes to the legislature right now in 2018?
A lot of our attention and frankly our worry, our anxiety, our rising blood pressure is focused on the federal administration and what we see as full frontal assaults and attacks on the progress that we made in California, on the values that Californians hold dear, and how we continue down the path that we've begun down, and can speed up and accelerate that work. Whether it be the effort to repeal and replace. The Affordable Care Act was something we were proud of implementing here in California, the first state in the nation to do so. We rolled it out first. We got the Medi-Cal expansion. We got our healthcare exchange up. We moved our uninsured numbers from 7 million down to 3 million, cut it down over half, and continued the work after that to work on addressing a significant number of those who are still uninsured, our undocumented population, with coverage through Medi-Cal for our undocumented children, and then some efforts this year to support our undocumented adults through Medi-Cal. So we worry, we sort of have to fend off the attacks. The fact that we lost individual mandate's a problem. It's a problem, and we need to address it. So we're sort of defending on one hand and trying to continue the progress that we made on the other, and so that takes up a lot of my mental space and attention, kind of figuring out how we overcome or end run or mitigate the challenges from the federal administration and can continue to do what Californians want us to do.
Well, Assemblymember, I know that you could join us just for this very sliver of time in between other things, and I appreciate very much that it was a priority, that this community was a priority for you to come join us. So thank you, sir, for being here. Let's get
Thank you for all your work. Thank you for having me. Thanks, DJ.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well done.